Hello, everybody. This is Scott Moore, and you're watching the SMC Journal podcast, the show that's all about performance engineering and IT today. I am Scott Moore, your host. Thank you for joining me. So, I had someone ask me a question on LinkedIn, and just to prove that I actually respond to your feedback, I'm going to bring this up for you. Anil Sundar actually asked me a question, and I'm going to answer it on today. That's what today's podcast is going to be about. And he is a enterprise performance engineer, SREs with Yash Solutions. Anil, thank you for reaching out to me and asking me to talk about this subject. And basically, here's what he says. Scott, as a visionary, what are your top 5 thoughts around shifting performance left at the enterprise level to transform an organization? Now, what a great and loaded question. So I thought instead of just replying just to Anil, I'd respond to everybody and give you my thoughts on it. But it indicates by his question, Scott, as a visionary, that proves you can fool some of the people some of the time. I don't know why he would think I'm a visionary. I just have a big mouth. But I'm going to give you my thoughts on this anyway. But before I do, I think it's time that we talk about the sponsors that make this show possible. This episode is sponsored by Microfocus and the LoadRunner Solutions family. That includes LoadRunner Professional, Enterprise, Cloud, and Developer. You know, performance matters. Did you know that LoadRunner Solutions have the largest community of practitioners in the world? Join that community at community.microfocus.com, scan the QR code, and check out the LoadRunner family page on performance engineering, as well as their YouTube playlist that we've got links for in the show notes on smcjournal.com, as well as YouTube. This episode is sponsored by PFLB, a provider of premier load and performance testing services for enterprises in all industries. They focus on a robust methodology, tools, and experienced engineers. Since 2008, they've built a reputation for reliability worldwide. BoomQ is their own innovative performance testing solution, and they consult around industry standard tools like JMeter, LoadRunner, Grafana, and more. Find out more at pflb.us. This podcast is sponsored by Folk Consulting. They offer high-quality consulting services around application performance management and operational monitoring of system performance. Ryan Folk and his staff of highly experienced consultants can handle any of your needs around application delivery management, analytics, application performance testing, monitoring, and digital management. Find out more at folkconsulting.com. Okay, on with the show. So this question, Scott, as a visionary, what are your top 5 thoughts around shifting performance left at the enterprise level to transform an organization? So much stuff has been talked about shifting left over the last few years, and it almost becomes cliched at a point. You know, we hear buzzwords like observability and DevSecOps and agile development, and these aren't just buzzwords. There's actually stuff behind them, but we talk about them so much in IT that they tend to become caricatures of themselves. So really, when we get down to it, to transform any organization, you know what you need? You need people of passion who just like what they do, and whatever you call the way that they do something, they're going to get work done because they love what they do. So if you start with a person of passion and you get people, they can get people rallied around them, then you're going to have success in your organization. That's number one, how you transform an organization. But in general, are there some things that I can talk about that will help you succeed as you shift left? Maybe. These are just things that I have learned as I've done consulting in many organizations, and also from talking to other performance engineers who have practiced the art of shifting things left and getting benefit out of it. So first, we must ask the question, why do we want to shift everything left? Okay, there's an obvious answer, which is to get the feedback of how we're doing earlier rather than later. We don't want to test performance or quality or security into an application at the end of some life cycle just before you roll it out. We know that that had caused problems for decades, right? So what do we do about that? we begin to get the feedback earlier and earlier in our process of building software so that we find out, hey, let's do quick checks. It's like not waiting until you have a heart attack to check your blood pressure often to find out if you're kind of headed in that direction and, hey, fatso, lose some weight. Yeah, I'm talking to me. So why do we shift left? Getting feedback early and often. And the key is making the feedback heard by the right people, reviewed by the right people, the right story being told, and then that's what helps make everybody understand where you're at so they can make changes to transform your organization. So what would be my main suggestion? So let me just pull this up, and I've got a few slides here to show you. It's very simple. First, my first suggestion is start with a self-service model. Implement self-service for your developers. I see organizations right now where they've had performance testers for years and years doing the in type of testing, the integration type testing, and then the development team comes along and says, can you also help us and write a few scripts for these couple of features that we're working on our team? And so they begin to help them, and then they begin to help other. So that becomes a service model where you're almost like building a consulting organization with inside a company, and the performance testing team gets to act like a consultant, and it's kind of cool. I mean, we used to call those like centers of excellence sometimes. But when I say about self-service, what I mean is take that knowledge from the performance testing team and bring it into an individual development team. The team that is developing the software should also learn enough. I'm not talking about the great scope that the performance testing Oz knows in the great organization. It's here's what you need to know to performance test your functional after you've functionally tested the function or feature that you're creating. And let's make sure that number one, when you do test it for performance, that you've tested this function for one. And then another step would be testing it for many, and that could be as few as 50 virtual users, 25, 50, less than 100 virtual users typically, just to see if that particular thing that the developer is working on will scale. And what they will typically do is use something like a JMeter or an open source tool, mainly because the licensing becomes so expensive as you roll out across the enterprise among 100 different development teams, and everybody has to have a license. Now that doesn't mean that you shouldn't necessarily pursue a commercial tool for that, because there are ways that you can bring the cost down instead of just buying and having a shared license, things like that. But most of the time what's going to happen is developers are in some kind of a skunksworks project, at least initially, and they'll pull down a JMeter or they'll use some kind of an open source tool. They'll put that to the test, and they'll run that load test. All right, that's kind of the first step. And then as they're moving over to DevOps, they want to reduce the toil. They'll put that into a continuous integration pipeline. So JMeter will be part of the CI process. They roll out the code, and again, this is not macro. This is micro. Your team, your feature. You've created the code, you created the unit test for it, you create that functional test for it in some kind of a use case, again, for one, then a performance test, probably JMeter, that's going to run for one, and then probably seeing if it runs, if it passes that. I would actually kill that CI job if you say that you need the login or whatever that feature is to come back in 5 seconds. If it doesn't do it for one, stop the process right there. Now you've or if you even did it manually and you see that it doesn't work for one, why do you need to continue forward? Okay, you're getting the feedback earlier. You just shifted testing left, and you're letting the developers do that so they don't have to come for every single thing. Oh, change my script for me, update this for me, do this. They're doing it themselves so that they save the performance testing team from having to get into that level of minutia, so they can tackle the bigger problems that the enterprise has, or the bigger rollout that needs to happen. Maybe it's 10 different teams that are putting together squads that are putting together features, and then they're rolling it out from there. So that takes a lot of the burden and the load, not off of the centralized performance testing team that's been helping these teams for so long. That's typically what I see. So that is a process to, first of all, get your developers used to doing that, making sure that they're comfortable with performance testing their own features and providing that feedback, and not just making it a checklist item that, hey, we do run a performance test in our CI pipeline, but then it goes immediately to the performance testing guys. There needs to be some level of review for that. So I would make sure that there is some type of that's another item I want to talk about, is a review. But secondly, when you get the self-service model done, the next thing that I would do, and this all takes time. This is not an overnight success story, right? This takes time. The next thing that I would do is go to the observability metrics or APM monitoring, whatever you have. One way to look at infrastructure, metrics, logs, traces, however you do your monitoring, your observability, bring that into a development environment so that you get that information early, right? So I want to know, for single user, how many CPU cycles am I taking up? How much memory am I actually taking up? And then that tells me kind of the cost that I'm going to have infrastructure wise. I also want to know, garbage collection information. And as you add load to that, is it exponential, or is it, does it just trickle up, or does it go crazy? You'll start seeing patterns with 50 users, sometimes less, before you ever have to hit those 500,000, 10,000 user tests. So bring in monitoring metrics, observability into the development environment, and cross-reference the timings that you're getting from, like, what you're trying to emulate the end user experience from, with the infrastructure cost and other things that you might want to do. What we used to call diagnostics, but more of profiling information, that could also be included at that level. And the overhead is okay because you're weeding stuff out at that point. Okay, so that's number two. The third thing that I would do is ensure that your feedback has some sort of manual review. So we said the main thing is to get the feedback early. But if, like I said before, if it becomes a checkbox in development and they never actually review it somewhere where they say, you know what, should we actually continue to pass this on? Yeah, it says that the light is green, but is that good? So example would be when version 23 is faster than version 22, is that always a good thing? Does anybody ever come back and ask the question, why is it faster? And also, what is the difference between the two? Whether it's a positive or a negative, how much of a difference in the numbers is it? And if the metrics are vastly different between builds, even if they're much better, someone should be raising a question. It shouldn't just be a rule that says faster is better, right? So it's about building in better and better rule sets and validation sets as you're building your pipeline, so that you're very stringent about what passes and what fails. So I feel like some of the best organizations out there have automated as much as they possibly can, and the things that make sense to automate, but they all have some type of a periodic manual review, an injection process where there are physical eyes on that, where a human says, yeah, this is totally okay, or are we scratching our head about something that doesn't make sense? You know what, we need to make a new rule to account for this. And you're going to get bit a few times. We talked about in our episode, last episode with Oracy software, talking about how you build confidence as you build automation, you build rule sets, and you build a CI pipeline to get faster and faster for delivery. You build confidence over time because you can't think of everything at once, right? It's going to be a process to build this. So again, it's easier said than it is done, some of the things that I'm saying. And I'm not trying to simplify it at all. I'm just trying to tell you this is a direction sort of to head in, and each company is going to be, individual for this. The next thing, number 4, would be to not forget the integrated performance testing. So just because you have shifted things left in the organization doesn't mean that you're just relying on unit performance test, API test, no CDN testing, no integrated test where you take all of the features, put it all together, and still do that major verification, validation before it rolls to production. Well, if all the unit tests pass, then the whole thing should pass. No, not necessarily, because you're not necessarily thinking, Mr. Developer or Mrs. Developer, how your code might affect somebody else's code, or how you're maybe stepping on each other from a session perspective, from a network perspective, or from a database perspective. That stuff will be found when you do that bigger integration test. So shifting left doesn't mean we've moved everything over to the left and we've left nothing to the right side either, right? And you still have to have that observability after the fact to prove out, did your test actually tell you, did your analysis tell you the right story, that you didn't get a surprise in production when you rolled out? It was what you expected it to be. And it is as cost effective as you thought it was going to be. It is as efficient as you thought it was going to be. So don't make shift left the only performance testing that you do. And this is what I refer to as shifting so far left that you've capsized the boat that you're on, and it takes a while to get that boat back on par when you've lost that balance. There has to be a balance between this shifting left and including the things that are also part of the right and the middle, right? So don't forget that. Number 5, learn how to tell a story. I think this is one of the things we've come to the conclusion when we talk about things in the performance tour. It keeps popping up over and over again. How does a performance tester or performance engineer share their value with a company? It's by being able to let the analysis tell a story. And that's not just by graphs and charts, right? And so think about that for a minute. You want to do continuous performance if you can. You want to think about performance the way you think about the refrigerator in your house. It is always running, always doing its job, always providing value, and you know when it's not working, it causes major problems. Whereas we've always thought of performance testing initially as, hey, it's like the steam cleaner. We only pull it out every 6 months or when there's like a major problem to clean up, a mess to clean up. And then people started figuring out, we can put this in a CI pipeline, we can run it every day or multiple times a day. That's kind of like your dishwasher in your house. But now we have to start thinking about it like the refrigerator. So that's the best analogy that I can give you on implementing continuous performance. But that has to in order to get the value out of that, you have to prove that value. Are you getting value out of it? We just seen in the World Quality Report that just got released that when we're talking about sustainable IT, sustainable IT is really not. The companies aren't doing sustainable IT to get a benefit of performance. Only 33% say that that's a big deal. It's all about brand recognition and getting more and more customers because we're doing sustainable IT. So the performance engineers have a duty to themselves to report not just graphs and charts and analysis, but the story that the analysis tells. Should this go to production? And if not, why? And why is this a showstopper? And why didn't we catch it earlier? And what are we going to do? What did we do as a team to address this issue? And why, how much money does this equate to that we've either helped the company make more of or save through the efforts of this testing that we've done and the tuning of the application that may have done, the re-architecting that came out of this, and how did that affect the bottom line? If you can't relate back to business context and also the financial impact of this, typically the business will start looking at you as more of a liability. And yeah, we may have to do performance testing, but let's go back to making it that checkbox, and let's find the lowest cost effective way to get this done. And that may mean getting rid of you as the performance engineer and getting somebody who is not as qualified but can get the test done, right? So when you begin to shift left, you have to think about that. Shifting left means it's a starting point for what we would consider continuous performance that goes all throughout the life cycle. So those are my 5 points, 5 thoughts, 5 major things that came out of that question from Anil. Anil, I really appreciate you asking me that, and I hope this was of some benefit to you and the other people that are watching the show. Think I'm wrong? Have any other input that you'd like to add or other questions? I'd like to hear your feedback too. Contact me on my website at scottmoore.consulting. There is my Twitter handle, Load Tester, as well as the URL to Scott Moore Consulting, my ID on LinkedIn, where I got this question. That's not the only way that you can reach me. You can also email me at help@scottmoore.consulting. And it would really help me if you like this content to subscribe to the YouTube channel and let me know how I'm doing by supporting this, by watching these episodes as they come out. And click on the little bell so that you know when new episodes come out. In 2022, we're releasing 2 shows a week, every Tuesday and Thursday at 8 a.m. I'm actually being told now that I'm releasing so much content about performance engineering that I'm kind of overwhelming people and they just don't have the time to watch all this. So we may actually tone that down for next year. But I wanted you, as the viewer of this show or somebody, a party that's interested in performance engineering, to have enough of a library so we can get started. These are things that you wouldn't necessarily watch maybe just once. You may want to refer back to them. Or if your manager or somebody else in the industry says, hey, what do you think about this? Maybe you can even point them to some of these videos. That's sort of what this is for. This show is about. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've learned something today. I hope you got some benefit out of it. Let me know either way. For this episode of the SMC Journal Podcast, this is Scott Moore signing off and saying thank you for watching again. Bye-bye.